take a look at how the press are covering the top stories this morning. And we start with Iran after the huge protests in the streets after the admission that it was the government, the military, who shot down a plane with all on board. Solange, how's that being covered?
Well, the Iranian press is covering it quite quietly. One of the only papers to discuss the protests that came about after Iran admitted to having accidentally downed this plane, Hamshari, gives us a very sort of factual, play-by-play account of the protests. Perhaps a way for them to actually be able to cover the story without getting into too tricky territory. The paper says that people gathered around Azadi Plus in Tehran carrying political signs and chanting anti-government slogans, and that they were able to block the streets from commuter traffic, which led to clashes with security forces, which then dispersed the crowds using tear gas. Like the other papers, the Tehran Times makes no mention of the student protests at all. Instead, they place blame on the unrest in the Middle East on Donald Trump and continue to argue that the killing of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani was meant to create, quote, instability in the region.
And it's being widely discussed in the Arab press as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for the Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour, the national unity that emerged after General Soleimani's assassination by American forces has now shifted into something else entirely. And they say the government's initial denials and then their admission Saturday of their mistake in downing the plane has, quote, reawoken the anger in the streets towards the regime. Videos have been posted online of protesters saying, quote, death to the liars, amidst calls for the supreme leader to step down. Now, Arab News also confirms that young protesters are calling for Ali Khamenei to apologize for the killing of Iranian citizens that were on board and then to resign. Now, cartoonists are also covering the anger in Iran towards the government. In Sharq al-Awsat, the pan-Arabic paper based in London, you have the supreme leader drawn as a sort of airplane being hit by one of his own missiles. And in Al-Arab, the apology by the Iranian government hasn't appeased anyone. The pan-Arab paper, also based in London, has a government official shedding fake or crocodile tears over the downing of the Ukrainian airlines flight.
Finally, on Iran, protesters aren't the only ones who are calling out the regime.
No, the Washington Post tells us that the only woman in Iran to have ever received an Olympic medal has defected from the country. On Instagram this weekend, the 21-year-old announced that she'd left the country, denouncing a government of, quote, hypocrisy, injustice, and oppression to women. So more bad news there for the Iranian regime this weekend.
We're turning now to France, where the government has called for an end to the strikes after walking back on some of their proposals this weekend.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's announcement that he's willing to closet his proposal of this pivot age of 64, when a worker could receive full pension, has created, according to Les Echos, a shift or a bend in the road. But for L'Opinion, another business daily, Edouard Philippe's compromise is a risky one. The paper says that Philippe has handed over one of his major playing cards to the labor unions, and it could, quote, create doubt about his ability to compromise and to reform France as he had promised to do. Now, the paper's cartoon is also along these lines of gambling, playing cards theme. You have a moderate CFDT union running the roulette table and sweating Philippe, saying rien ne va plus, or all bets have been made.
But the left-leaning papers are wondering if the Prime Minister's concessions may be a trap.
Yeah, a trick or a compromise. That's what Libération wonders on its front page today, saying that even if the CFDT's union is pleased with the move and that negotiations are progressing, the other unions are still very much in the fight. The paper reminds us that beyond the moderate unions, the others have said they won't give up until the government pulls these reforms. For L'Humanité, the communist paper, Philippe's proposal is meant to dupe or to divide. The paper says that the government is trying to divide the unions and so as to be able to get their reforms passed.
Okay, now finally, Solange, you have an article for us about an incredibly talented intern.
Yeah, this is a story about a 17-year-old named Wolf Kukier. Quite a fun name there, Wolf.
Great name.
Yeah. He was interning this past summer at NASA when he discovered on his third day of his internship a planet. And he was looking at images and thought that something, quote, looked suspicious. And so he alerted his supervisor. And sure enough, after verification, he actually found a planet. Now, this planet has been named TOI 1338. But in the young man's household, it is naturally called Wolf Topia.
And that should actually be its name. And if
It
you're going to
should
have
be.
a
We should
planet
call
named
it
after
Wolftopia.
you, what a name to have. Brilliant. Okay, Solange, great to have you in here with us. Thanks very much. Now, after the break, we'll bring you today's focus as France holds a summit with Sahel state leaders. We take a look at the work being carried out by French troops on the ground to fight jihadists along the three borders between Mali, Niger and Burkina. Well, it comes at a tense time after a recent string of attacks, notably one that killed 70 Malian armed forces soldiers. That's Focus, coming up in the next half hour.